Hello there, and welcome to episode 6 of my Lancastrians and Yorkists vlog. We're still looking at depth topic 2, Henry V and the conquest of France, 1413 to 21. And last time we talked about what the significance was of renewing the war with France. This time we're going to focus a bit more on what actually happened in the campaigns and what were the conditions that made it a success possible, and hopefully crack on also to think about why that success was kind of double-edged, that the consequences were both really good and also perhaps slightly concerning for England. So, first of all, what was the course of the 1415 campaign? Last time we talked about why Henry V launched his campaign, and this time let's have a look at what actually happened. So Henry V sailed from Southampton with between 10,500 and 12,000 men, and they land in Normandy, where they besieged and captured Harfleur. But crucially, it took them 6 weeks to do that, and there were some significant losses. Maybe up to 3,000 of the English soldiers were killed or incapacitated, some by French action, but also by a big outbreak of dysentery in the camp. So some of those that weren't fit to fight anymore were sent home. Some had to be left behind as a garrison in Harfleur, and of course some had died, and this meant that the rest were free to march on, and Henry V decided to march them through northern France all the way to Calais, which was also an English possession at that time, some 130 miles away. It's not really clear why he did that. Some people think that he was trying to lure the French out and was confident of beating them. Some people think it was just to prove a point. Some people think it's because he had perhaps become convinced that God was going to protect his army and he was going to win, which I guess he did in the end. So well done, Henry. A key thing about this march to Calais was that they had to cross the river Somme at some point, and that was quite a tricky thing because the French had assembled an army and were monitoring where the English were going, but somehow Henry manages to get ahead of the trackers, find a ford that they can get across, repair it, which needed to be done, which is quite a dangerous thing to do, and get across. And that means that then they're able to face off against the French army, at least in a battleground where they're not at a complete disadvantage, i.e. coming out of a river. So this is the famous Battle of Agincourt, which took place on the 25th of October. The English were outnumbered, probably quite heavily outnumbered, although not as heavily as some English chroniclers have made it seem. We reckon that they had about 8,000 men in their army by this time, and that probably there are about 12,000 or so French troops. Also, though, the French had more cavalry, more mobile army than the English. About 80% of the English army were longbowmen, and actually probably about half of the longbowmen were Welsh as well. So we talk about the English army, but it clearly wasn't all English. Henry V positioned his troops on a muddy field. It rained the night before the battle, and on one flank was some wooded area. On the other flank was marshy area, trapping the French into fighting on a narrow front. Or, if you read other accounts, the French foolishly attacked on a narrow front and got themselves in bother. Either way, the upshot was the same, that the first French cavalry attack was met with a hail of arrows from the English. Many horses and riders were struck down, and then they got bogged down in the muddy field and struggled to manoeuvre, at which point the English come forward and are able to capture and kill lots of the French attack, and that kind of goes on a few times through the day. It's worth saying here that the archers, when they ran out of arrows, were able to go forward. They were lightly armed, very mobile, and they didn't get so bogged down in the field, and that's also seen as being one of the things that is either a clever thing on Henry V's part or a lucky thing, depending on your view of the battle and of the tactics and strategy that took place. One of the most controversial elements of the battle was the slaughter of French prisoners. This was normally prisoners were caught, especially noblemen, and ransomed off later on. You charge some money to give them back, and that was standard practice in medieval warfare. But Henry V seems to have feared that the French reinforcements were coming, or that he was going to get attacked from behind. And therefore the prisoners would kind of come into play again in the battle. And so at some point he ordered the execution, or the murder, as you might put it, of lots of the French prisoners. This was extremely controversial at the time. although clearly not everyone was killed, because there were some significant prisoners taken as well. All in all, English losses were only between 1 and 300 or so, although a couple of important people did die. Henry V's cousin, Edward, Duke of York, and Michael de la Pole, the Duke of Suffolk. Actually, he'd only become the Duke of Suffolk when his dad was killed at Harfleur a few weeks before, but nevertheless, two notable magnates of England. French losses, though, massively outnumber that. We don't know full numbers, but clearly thousands died. We do know that 11 magnates, 120 barons, and around 1,500 knights were killed. This is mostly because of the execution of prisoners. Although, as I said, it's worth noting that the Duke of Orleans and the Duke of Bourbon were not killed. They were taken prisoners, so not all the prisoners were executed. The significance of this victory is massive. It's not kind of overstated in history, perhaps kind of rarely. It cements the legitimacy of Henry V's reign. It seems to show that God is on his side. When he gets home, mass celebration. There's not really anyone in England who's going to challenge him anymore, so it really secures him kind of personally and politically, but also Parliament are falling over themselves initially to reward him favourably, to give him funds for further military campaigns. And conversely, the French are completely shaken. The threat from France declines, including the naval threat, no more kind of skirmishes in the Channel. And the French actually never fight Henry V in open combat again. It's always siege warfare after this, because literally they're running scared. And the removal of so much of the nobility of France is a big deal. In the aftermath of Agincourt, Henry has to go home and kind of restock and get his army back together. And he tries, whilst he's back in England, to gain more land and kudos in France by diplomacy. But this still fails, that the French still resist that. And so he invades France again in 1417 with a similar sized army, about 10,500 soldiers. This time the idea is to conquer the whole of Normandy. He starts by besieging and capturing Caen, and then Caen, Caen, and then works his way south through Alençon and Domfront, while his brother Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, besieged and captured Cherbourg up the peninsula. Finally, they besiege and capture Rouen, which is the traditional capital, I guess, of Normandy, the traditional possession, at least, of the Duke of Normandy. Between July 1418 and January 1419, a long siege goes on there, but eventually they do capture it and the conquest of Normandy is complete. And just to sort of illustrate something we'll come back to later on, the English fine Rouen, the inhabitants, the citizens of Rouen, £50,000. This is an enormous amount of money, but part of the conquest of Normandy and France is about England kind of it's not about England gaining money, but they have to gain money to pay for the warfare that's gone on, and that's why they fine them £50,000. Now, while this is going on, why did Henry V have success? One of the reasons is that, as we said last time, there's a split in France, and Henry V exploits what's going on there very successfully in 1419 through an alliance with Burgundy, what's called the Burgundian Alliance. So Burgundy, just to sort of take stock of this, to wind back slightly, was a powerful region of France, and all the more so since a marital alliance with Flanders in 1384. Flanders is a massive sort of trading powerhouse, so Burgundy and Flanders together was a very wealthy area of eastern France, or what we would think of as eastern France. A rivalry at court had developed between the Burgundians and supporters of the Duke of Orleans, as I explained last time, the king's brother, and this is made worse by the incapacity of Charles VI, because they're really vying for who controls France while he is out of action. The Duke of Orleans was captured at Agincourt, held by England for 24 years, and so it's the Dauphin, really, the heir to the French throne, that takes over that position of being the rival to the Burgundians. After capturing Normandy, Henry V sought peace with Burgundy, and that opening was made more likely because in 1419 the Duke of Burgundy, John the Fearless, was assassinated by supporters of the Dauphin and the Duke of Orleans, and this was a revenge for the reverse killing in 1407 by the Burgundians of the Duke of Orleans. So that's a bit confusing. But basically, the Duke of Burgundy was assassinated by supporters of the Dauphin in 1419, and this meant the Burgundians were hopping mad and decided to ally with Henry V against the Dauphin and his Armagnac supporters at the French court. Philip the Good was the new Duke of Burgundy. He's the one that accepted the overtures of Henry V, and that paved the way for the Treaty of Troyes, or Troyes, as I believe the French say, in 1420. This was a treaty that Henry V signed with France as a whole. The Burgundians backed Queen Isabella at court, and the court accepted this treaty. Under the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, Henry V became heir to the French throne, and therefore the Dauphin was disinherited, and therefore, of course, he never accepted this treaty. The premature death of Henry V really undermines this clause, but yeah, a big success in 1420. He married Catherine of Valois and had a son by Catherine, Henry, who's going to become Henry VI, who's born in 1421. Catherine of Valois was the daughter of Charles VI of France. Henry V was going to rule France as regent, again booting out the Dauphin until the death of Charles VI, although that's not really a marriage made in heaven. Henry V comes in to do that, but there's significant friction with the nobility of France. And there was also territory involved. Normandy was given to, it was separated from France at least until the death of Charles VI, when it would rejoin. And this allowed Henry V to give bits of Normandy to English lords to reward them, but also to give them skin in the game for any sort of future skirmishes with France. Committing them to its defence. Henry V was also given lands around Calais and Boulogne, which is near Calais, in the northeast of France. And there was also an agreement through the Burgundian alliance that they would work together against the Dauphin and his supporters. And this was initially really successful. They entered Paris in December 1420. And then the following year, the Dauphin strikes back in 1421 by attacking and capturing Bourget, Bauge, he has a little accent on it, and they killed the English commander based in Bourget, who was Thomas, Duke of Clarence, Henry V's brother. Henry V responds to this challenge from the Dauphin by raising another army, seeking to grind down the Dauphin and his supporters. But after a lengthy siege of a place called Meaux, M-E-A-U-X, I'm probably saying that completely wrong, Henry V contracted dysentery and died after a short illness in August 1422. Charles VI, ironically, died 2 months later, which meant that Henry V missed out being King of France by 2 months, but his son inherits that throne. Unfortunately, Henry VI was only 9 months old at that time. And so a ruling council was put together. Henry V's brothers, John, Duke of Bedford, and Humphrey, Duke of Gloucester, take over, and we'll talk about that next time, I think. Just though, as we sort of wrap up, what were the what was the double-edged nature of renewing the war with France? So what were the consequences? Well, we've seen already some of the short-term consequences, which were really positive and successful. There was massive success on the battlefield. A big kudos for Henry V. His reputation is massively enhanced. Security at home. The Burgundian alliance is really successful. The Treaty of Troyes brings him again, the throne of France, a wife, an heir. Again, kind of success. The land that's given to Henry to rule he's able to use that as a reward. Parliament's all on his side, so massive kind of success. But there are several things that also kind of are flies in the ointments that don't die. They're still buzzing around. In fact, in 1422, when at the end of Henry V's reign. The first one is to do with money. The 1417 invasion cost a lot of money. Taxation was big there, but there were also several loans taken out. And already by 1420 it was clear that Parliament did not want to commit to an open-ended war in France, especially one that really was between the Burgundians and the Dauphin. They saw that as a French civil war, and they were worried about getting drawn into that in a kind of semi-permanent way. So they wanted the war to pay for itself, and that's fine when you're winning all the time, but as the war drags on and becomes more defensive, then that's a big problem, and the money just isn't there for that. So that's the first kind of big problem. Coupled with that, they were hoping that the war would pay for itself through those victories, but not only were victories kind of going to dry up, also trade is really dislocated because of the war. For example, Gascony was a big exporter of wine. Gascony was owned by England. It's kind of in southwest France, but that trade declines because of the war, and that's a subsequent impact on Bristol, which is a big kind of port that was dealing with those wines. There was also significant displacement of the population as the war happens and fields get burned, or castles get pulled down, or towns get trashed. People have to kind of move out and find somewhere else to live. That dislocates kind of the local economy. And in 1420, probably partly as a result, there's a really bad harvest. There was, as an effect of that, starvation in France, which had to be paid for, and people had to be helped. And if they weren't helped and died, that dislocates the economy as well. So lots of kind of big sort of socio-economic problems that were an unforeseen, I guess, and an unexpected consequence of the war that are passed on, as well as the triumph and success of the immediate victories. Also, and probably the biggest downside of Henry's victory, is that the Dauphin doesn't accept the Treaty of Troyes and doesn't go away. He retreats to the south and east of modern-day France and pulls together allies there and continues to fight against Burgundy and Burgundy's English allies. And from the perspective of history, kind of pulling back to where we are today, we can see perhaps that the Treaty of Troyes was really doomed to fail from the start. But that's probably because we know how things pan out, and it's really based upon the fact that Henry V doesn't survive for the 10, 20 years that he was hopefully expecting to be around for. Because he dies in 1422, it means that it does look like the problems that he had in the early 1420s were bigger than the successes. But at the time, it was probably the other way around. So next time we'll look at that transition from Henry V's reign through to Henry VI's adult reign, and then we'll get cracking on the next step study as part of that. I hope that's helpful, and see you next time. Bye.